Hi. RedBubble. So RedBubble is a marketplace for independent artists and designers from all over the world. They put up their images and designs, and then we print that on a print-on-demand when somebody orders it. We've got about 12 million images on the site, 250,000 artists, and those artists will earn about $20 million this year. Just a little bit about, so I'm a bit surprised at how polite some of the previous speakers have been. And I'm also surprised they must be much, much more successful than RedBubble, because when I see an audience of 800 people, I don't see people willing to learn and people interested in RedBubble. I see customers. And so the first thing I'll say, before I say anything else, because I certainly don't want to forget, is you've got to go to RedBubble and you've got to buy something. This is absolutely, it's actually not, it's obligatory. And you have to do that in order to understand what we do. But more importantly, you just have to do it because of your customers. The three things I'm going to talk about, though, if you, other than buying something from RedBubble, which will be great for you and great for me, there's actually three things I do want to share. I want to talk about pivoting once. I want to talk about being nearly dead. And I want to talk about a beating heart. You've heard a lot of stuff this morning and this afternoon. And there's been a lot of concepts and there's been a lot of ideas. And so I think it's really important that I reduce my presentation down to a single idea and a single concept, which I'll get to, but you only are, at the end of all of this 45 minutes which we have to hear together, you're only going to have to remember one thing, which is going to simplify your lives a lot. But to get there, let's talk about pivoting once. This is RedBubble. There's a few very early employees for RedBubble. I think they may have seen this. This was the first idea, first iteration of RedBubble back in 2006. Now, like a lot of Aussie entrepreneurs, we thought that the best thing to do was to see what was working in the United States and steal it and make it work here in Australia, because that's what Aussie entrepreneurs used to do. And what we saw was a site called Cafe Press, and we said, well, that's working in the United States, let's steal it and make it work here. And so what this was going to be was a place where you could come to RedBubble and you could put your own image on a t-shirt, in this case. We looked at this and we said, we really hate this. This is just a terrible idea. So we changed it. It became a dog. And no longer could you put, now the dog could put himself on a mug or on a dog bowl. We looked at this idea and we said, this is a really, really terrible idea. So this is, and we were honest with ourselves. We just said, this just stinks. So we changed it. We added the woman and the dog. But it wasn't, in essence, we now had dog bowls and t-shirts, but it really wasn't getting any better. And I sat around, and there was about six of us at RedBubble at this stage. I looked around the group now and I said, this is a really terrible idea, but will any of you use this? Will any of you actually want to go to this site, or tell any of your friends to go to this site? And they said, no, I'm not going to go anywhere near it. But will you tell any of your friends to go anywhere near it? And I said, no, I don't think so. So we had to make a choice of whether to launch it, of course. And it was interesting. They weren't going to tell me. And so I said, well, do we really want to spend the next period of our lives building something which we won't use and we don't think our friends will use, but we think somebody else? We think there's somebody out there who really does want to have a picture of their dog on a mug or a picture of themselves on their t-shirt. We thought there was somebody out there, it just didn't happen to be us. But we decided that at the end of the day, we really didn't want to become what I called vegans making hamburgers. And so, life is just too short to do something which you don't fundamentally believe in. So that was pivot one. And we did seriously pivot at this point and said, okay, that idea, that stank, the technology is actually exactly the same. Even the concepts are actually exactly the same, but we pivoted it fundamentally. And this is what we actually before I get to that, we did have the name RedBubble. And people ask me, where does the name come from? Because names are interesting. Names are difficult on the internet because you want to have the domain .com. and I said it has to be spellable. It had to be trademarkable, and you're really reducing the set of names which you get down to, and it has to be brandable, and it has to be extensible. So it had to be lots of bulls. And this is how we got to RedBubble. Just the name emerged. I had to buy it. It would cost me $3,500, which was amazing in 2006. I don't know how much domains are going for these days. But if any of us go back into a time machine, by the way, back to 2000, say even 95, and if you go back into a time machine and you really want to make a lot of money, just buy up hundreds of thousands of domain names. But anyway, we can't do that. But anyway, more about RedBubble. It lends itself to be a creation of communities, as in, are you in my bubble? Do you want to join my bubble? I have a bubble for one. All that stuff about fluidity and finding spaces on the web where people are comfortable, which is just what I want the website to be about. Rather than being a single space, the website needs to be able to contain thousands or tens of thousands of intersecting communities. So we were pretty ambitious at this stage, and that was, of course, where Bubble came from. Red came from a slightly different source. Just share this because, at least in my mind right now, I'm testing new names concepts against RedBubble and not finding anything I like more from a total branding perspective. Interestingly, the colour red seems to resonate very well with a select audience, your wife and mine. This was an email from me to a co-founder. So we were testing things even then, but it was just to a very small community. So we were changing the site, and we wanted to launch something very different, and we trying to clarify what the business model was going to be. And at this stage, you had the emergence of the really large communities, NetSpace, with Facebook and with MySpace, and the other ones were getting there, and you had the e-commerce sites. And I put together a business model which said, what we need to get is a customer acquisition cost of a social network, and then we need the return per customer or the revenue per customer of an e-commerce site. And this was going to be a transformational business. This slide, in some way or other, is still incredibly relevant because this really is the crack cocaine of business models. If you ever actually did nail this completely, it is a marketplace in general, but even the best marketplaces doesn't grow at the pace of Facebook. So, if you ever really did get to that, it would be a truly transformational business. But we certainly had that idea. This was how it looked from an economic perspective. I've never ever seen this, and this went to a business plan. I was trying to raise $2 million for the site at this stage, the business plan. Most business plans talk about how big the market is. We're in the market, which is $20 billion. We're going to get 1% of that market in a few years' time. Eventually, we're going to get 10% of that market, and it's going to be $2 billion of revenue, and it all works out quite nicely. And then you talk about how we're going to change the world if you've got that sort of mindset, which most startups have, and you're going to talk about how humongous you're going to be. I had the complete opposite slide. I still don't know whether it's a good idea, so you're welcome to steal it, all of those who are in startup land, and try this out. What I said was on the x-axis, our e-commerce success, we could go from woeful, bad to mediocre success, and the successes on an e-commerce site could be small, very small, or small. So what I was saying was if we're anything better than completely shithouse, we'd have a chance of winning. And I don't know whether this was compelling to the investors. The question which I would have, or I have for myself, is woeful, bad, and mediocre, and small was going to be 1 million. So on the top left-hand corner, you're going to be 1 million active users and woeful conversion rates of 5%. What did I get wrong on this? I guess you're probably going to ask. You may ask, or maybe thinking about. May not be. Anyway, the thinking I was, we've never hit a 5% conversion rate, but we've got a hell of a lot better on the y-axis. So we grew up the y-axis a lot quicker now I actually understand that the x-axis was, well, wrong. And when you're writing your business plans in the early days, you're going to be, well, wrong. And the reason why it was wrong, of course, is that almost no e-commerce site has a 10% conversion rate, even Amazon at 7.5%. That is actually an outstanding conversion rate, and 2% is actually pretty good. So it was wrong on those dimensions, but it was an interesting slide. You can steal it, as I say, as an idea. I actually don't think I would, to be honest. But anyway. But what we did do, this is actually, I think, what did sway it. So I was talking about the business model which didn't work. This was the slides which actually weighed. So I was just trying to raise, unlike some other companies here which have really had to, were able to scale really just out of their own resources, we did try to raise quite a chunk of change early on and raise $2 million off the business plan. I think probably the investors, as most good investors are, didn't read any of the words. They probably spent a bit of time looking at the charts, and then they probably invested because of the design. So this design was what we wanted to launch, and this is a site which we wanted for ourselves. So what we wanted was something which could showcase the art which we were passionate about and showcase it in a way in which we were passionate. So this design was actually done by my co-founder, who did the previous interesting designs with dogs and things on it, and he actually redid this, and he said, this is a site which I would like. And it was the whole idea of being beautiful, of having something which was resonant, something which we genuinely believed in. And so this site, of course, back in 2006 was unbuildable, I think. But that didn't really matter. You could build it in PowerPoint, but you couldn't actually build it on the web. But we didn't have to do that because we had, that was going to come later. And anyway, I don't think you can actually do back shadows even now quite like that. You may be able to, but you'd be tricky. This is going to be a page. The interesting, actually, just as I go back on that, the interesting thing was how broad our ambition was. So when we were starting there, we were talking about having writing, we were talking about having video, and we were talking about having images and books. So the name RedBubble, we could have chosen a name which had art in it or design in it. We chose something which would actually be extensible across all of those categories, something like Amazon can do. What reason why Bezos chose Amazon as well. So I think there is a bit of a danger in choosing a name which is too descriptive of exactly what you're doing now, because you will end up doing something else and you'll be stuck with some funny name which doesn't describe you at all. Anyway, so we're stuck with a funny name which doesn't describe us at all, but at least it doesn't describe somebody else in something sense. Anyway, and then we had the sense of what the page would look like with an artist put their stuff up, all beautiful stuff, and most of those features do exist on RedBubble in some form or other now. This was actually what did sort of launch. I think this is a few weeks after, and you can see we had a basic idea of we wanted to honour the art wherever it came from. We was going to be diverse. We're going to have communities. We're going to have the thing was going to market itself, and it was something which we were going to be passionate about. And we had T-shirts there as well. So that was going great guns, and we launched. And we were very clear about what our purpose was as a company. This came a little while after launch, but not a hell of a lot after. And it was, we stand for artists, for the work they create, for the audiences they inspire, and for the buyers they move. We honour them, their work and their passions. The creative endeavour should be shared joyously with others. All should feel free to join in the show. I got that. We put those words together, and they profoundly resonated with the staff. When you, and have done subsequently, I've seen surveys of staff and they talk about their corporate values in various forms. And in my experience, all staff will only remember one thing, or one of your values. It is quite possible that half your staff will remember 3 or 4, but not all. There is no scenario in which all your staff are going to remember all of your values. So if you're going to, unless you only have one value, so we decided to only have one value because then they could actually all remember it. And that is, we stand for artists. They have, I will admit this has been a bit dangerous because they do remember we stand for artists. They actually forget the second bit of it is we also stand for the people, for the buyers. And at times it has been a danger for us of skewing a little bit too in favour of the artists, because also most of our staff, to be honest, also have been artists in some form or other. So that was the values. And this is, we did actually have, and we did actually, like everybody else, I think I've got the picture of the worst of the offices. Everybody, a lot of other presentations have had pictures. This, it looks okay, and it was actually done reasonably nicely, but it genuinely was a garage, and it genuinely was 4 degrees in there. And so, well, you could have, you had short meetings because you wanted to get out there, or you had to have meetings on the move because otherwise you're going to freeze to death. So, and that was the worst of the office. I'm not going to show it. Oh, and we were mad, completely and absolutely mad. So this looks like a lot of things. It is actually a lot of things. So this is 10,000 images from RedBubble, which a coder coded up over a weekend, and it was an endless mosaic, and you could click on them and go through. So we did all these mad things, and this, I still don't know whether any of these things work from a marketing perspective, because unlike really clever marketers who know that half the budget is wasted, I didn't at this stage know. Didn't know whether 100% of our budget was wasted, so never really knew on this thing. But what it did do, what I did know, was it generated passion. And this was, I think, from about 2 or 3 months after we launched. Has it occurred to you, creators of RedBubble, that you have created something vastly more than you envisaged? Well, you want to hear that from your customers. An outcome unexpected. I get a sense, unclear yet, as to what it is about, that I have entered a dimension where that is warm and vibrant contact. So just wanted to say what a brilliant idea RedBubble is. And just as importantly, it has been executed superbly. Don't you want to hear this from your customers? Like people like you who then come and buy from us, for example. The website is so simple to use, even with a rich array of social networking functions and options. Someone very clever put this site together. I think it was Paul Keating who said that anybody who says that they don't like flattery has never truly been flattered. Anyway, the collective hours of workmanship of all the bubblers here is immense, and coupled with your marketing, printing and development expertise, we have surely got a winning partnership. It was lovely that our artists were thinking of themselves in partnership with us, because that's how we think of it from our perspective. With success and awards on their way, we did actually get lots of awards. I would like to see RedBubble.com nominated for the Bestest New Australian Business Award. We were, and you can tell I love you, gods of the bubble world, heavens above. Oh, gee, sucks. Anyway, how can I get any work done when I spend so much time on RedBubble, uploading images and looking at all the other works that keep appearing? RedBubble is an amazing place to be, with over 20 responses along the following line. So there was a lot of this. This was just, this was literally sort of a day's collection. So clearly, on the basis of this, everything was going swimmingly well, and we were just going to hit it out of the park. That's obvious, isn't it? It didn't happen. By end of 2008, we'd hit a wall. This was the Managing Director's report in December 2008. RedBubble continues to experience scaling challenges in accounting, customer service, community managing, hosting, and fraud control. Those things, like 4, 5 pretty big things to have scaling challenges in. These scaling challenges have significantly curtailed our ability to invest in marketing or sales-related activities. We were so busy fighting fires, we couldn't actually do any marketing or sales. Little progress has been made towards optimization of the logistics engine, so we couldn't actually deliver anything. And finally, the financial report is not sufficiently accurate to be presented to the board. So there you go. So you got lovely customer feedback. We had a real problem. And so we set a goal from July 2009. We need to be cash flow positive on existing resources whilst growing sustainably, because of course the GFC had now hit, and there was no way we were going to raise money, and the site wasn't scaling, and we couldn't market it, and we had people saying nice things about it, but there weren't that much shopping going on. So we had 3 paths: expense reduction, which was basically going to be sacking people; margin improvement; or increased sales. But we did set a guiding philosophy and build on what we have. What was the significance of... I actually look at this chart and I still don't really understand it, but I'm going to try and explain it nevertheless. On the left-hand side was where we were in a monthly sales breakdown. We were doing, I think it said $310,000 worth of sales, in which we were making $20,000. If we were going to be successful, to be cash flow positive with the existing team, we had to get it closer to $1 million, but we had to increase our margin. And so in 6 months, in order to become cash flow positive with current expenses, we need to improve gross profit to 30%, which was going to be a significant change, and triple sales. This needs to be achieved in 6 months. That was a big goal. I just sort of, you can actually understand the nature of the problem in the next 2 slides. This was our margin on everything we sold. As you can see, we're just a little bit past the beginning of this curve by the time we're saying we're actually losing things on every single thing we sold back then. So this is right back on the left-hand side of the chart. I will say to you, no matter how ambitious you are as a company, it really is a really bad idea to be losing things on having negative margin. And not even the most crazy VC will believe that negative margin is sustainable in the long term. Anyway, so we had to, so we had negative margin, but the fortunate thing was we actually weren't selling anything either. So this is a chart of this is actually a chart of conversion, and where we are here is it's about 0.14%. So just over 1.5 people in 1,000 people who came to RedBubble at that stage would actually buy something, which was, even though they loved us, they weren't actually shopping. So we go back to the start of this talk. If you love me and you don't go and shop at RedBubble, you're one of the 0.14%, which is not where you should be. You should be one of the people who has shopped. So we had people loving us but not buying, so we had to fix it. What we did to fix it was actually interesting, though. We did not fundamentally change anything. We actually just said, we need to get better at what we're doing, and we need to fix some real, we actually did believe that these people who loved us would actually start shopping, provided we actually improved things. And that was really about improving the delivery, improving the website performance, allowing them to do a little bit of marketing, but we didn't actually change the purpose at all. We didn't pivot around that. So since 2007, standing for independent artists and those who love their work, and we refined the mission. We said, okay, have we got the mission wrong here? Is anything? And the answer was, no, we haven't. Let's help more artists reach more people more easily, more often, and tell them we're doing that. So there was some, as we climbed out of that terrible trough of not selling things on which we were losing money, and against the background of a financial crisis, which was meaning no money was going to come in from any other things, it really came back down to a recommitment to those core things and just improving some fundamentals which were actually wrong in the system. We'd actually, in a sense, grown too fast and we'd added too much and we hadn't got better at it. So there's a point where you actually should pivot, which we did pivot in the early days, and there's a time when you shouldn't pivot. You actually just need to recommit to getting excellent, and so that's what we did. Interestingly enough, a little while after this, we had a second moment of crisis. And this was over a whole lot of content. One of the problems which you have with the user-generated content is that users generate content. And they don't always generate the content you would like them to generate. And sometimes, so you have to make things which you don't think are going to happen. So we knew that it was a chance that if we had a website where people could upload images, some people would decide that this was a place for pornography. And so we had to have, we decided we didn't need to be another porn site. There was enough porn sites on the edge, so we made some decisions around pornography, and we made, obviously, decisions around copyright and trademarks and all of those sorts of things. But then we actually said, fundamentally, we've got a set of user guidelines. Those user guidelines will describe what we do on the site, what's allowable on the site, and we will not arbitrarily take stuff down because it causes offence. I know this has been, I know this line has been a bit trashed recently, but people do actually have a right to be offended, and people do have a right to offend other people as well. And we had just before this image was put up, and I'll tell you the background to it, we'd just had a brutal period of intense interaction around content, which had actually resulted, we actually had at the end of that decided our user guidelines did need amending. There was a particular sensitivity which we needed to take into account, and you can read it on the internet, it's all there. And we did amend our guidelines to this. And then I was contacted. Trayvon Martin, an African-American, was shot in Florida, and I was contacted by the Los Angeles Times, and somebody had put up this image, and they said, you realise that this image is really offensive to Neighbourhood Watch, you need to take it down, and what's your comment on it? You're a fly which we're going to nail. And I looked at it, and I think that they were expecting me to say, absolutely, it's terrible, we're going to take it down. I looked at it and I said, this is a legitimate piece of political commentary. It's well done as well, and the person has a right to put that up, and we are not going to take it down, no matter what the nature of the publicity associated with it, or no matter what the nature of the controversy. We've just had another one, a similar thing with Matt Brown, who was shot in I think Missouri, and there was a lot of stuff came up there, and some of that content violated, there's the Google's shopping feed policies, or they said it did. I don't think it actually did. And we had to make a decision around that. There was they said, well, you can take it straight off the site. And I said, we'd rather go bankrupt than do that. We did actually, Google does have a right to decide what goes in their shopping feed, so we did actually get it out of the feed in response to that. But the suggestion that we would actually take it off the site in response to a financial objective was just not going to happen. And so we've had, with these various content wars which have happened over the years, in general, we've really urged this decision to be true to the artist and be true to that core mission. Unless there's sometimes we have to be very sensitive. So going into Germany, we know there's going to be new issues there, and we have to abide by the law, of course. but within that, it's really about standing for artists. So, this was by our 5th birthday. One of our values has been a bit funny, happy fucking birthday, and that we shared on the website. And you'll notice that I'm wearing a t-shirt with a pug on it. I'm also wearing a t-shirt with a pug on it now, and I've got a iPhone case with a pug on it. Anybody who's got a pug and doesn't buy it into this presentation. Anyway, going on. And this is where we are now. This was from actually a few days ago. Wow, this was an unexpected surprise. I couldn't be happier with the results I've had on RedBubble. This is by far the most amazing artist-driven merchandising marketplace on the web. It's just tremendous. Thank you for providing a platform for selling my design to a worldwide market. And there's a pug. Now, what are the 2 lessons which are coming out of all of this? The first and most important one is about passion. The startup world is going to be difficult. It is going to be painful. Things are going to go wrong. There are going to be mistakes. Even when you're succeeding, you could well be failing. And the only way you're going to get through that is if you're doing something which you're passionate about. And that really early decision not to launch a website which we weren't passionate about was fundamental. So that's the passion, and the second bit of it is really related to that. There is no way, I don't think, some of these stories which we've heard this morning may suggest that the journey has been not as painful as it has been. I guarantee you that if you sat down any of these people and talked to them about various stages of the businesses, they will confess that there were times of extraordinary pain in that. I can remember during those days going to work on a Monday morning, literally sitting in the car, just not wanting to go in and have to confront the issues which we were dealing with, but having to sort of get up. And the only way then you can get up to do it is you're not going to do it for the money. You really aren't. No matter, I don't think anybody wants money that much that they're prepared to put themselves through this much grief. The only reason why you're going to do it, and the only reason why you're going to convince other people to do it, is because they fundamentally believe in what you're trying to do. And when I talk to RedBubble and ask, why are we there, what we're doing, it's the standing for artists. Everybody gets that. The staff get that. The investors get that, and they understand it, and it guides every decision which we make. Thank you very much.
I think we are heading to the lounge room.
Lounge room.
Excellent. So ask your questions on Slido. I'll just jump in with a few. I think we've heard lots of stories during the day about these companies that were bootstrapped from the beginning. And I think one interesting part of your story was around the money you raised before you launched. And so perhaps looking at it another way, what will you waste your money on when you raise money early? Or do you think, what's your sort of financing advice to people in the early stages of a business?
Yeah, that isn't, I think we certainly did waste money. I think of some of the things which we built and some of the things which we did. If we hadn't have had the money, we wouldn't have done it, but we wouldn't have done the things. We couldn't actually, there are some companies which you can't actually launch, you can bootstrap. RedBubble, it's an art and design marketplace. It just couldn't be done ugly. We just couldn't have underinvested. It had to have a lot of content. So if you're getting, 5,000 images a day uploaded, you actually need some pretty significant, investment in the software. And in the very early days, very early on, the amount of stuff which was hitting this website was large. It also was multifaceted. So we had a community aspect to what RedBubble was doing, which was important. And so I don't think it was possible to do RedBubble on the cheap. When we had realised that we weren't going to raise any more money back in 2009 and had to focus in, that was good for us. But I think there's, you need to be a bit honest with your sites as well. I do see things coming to me as an investor occasionally and say we're going to raise $300,000. I say, oh gee, I don't reckon $300,000 is going to get you to the point where you're going to be in a position to raise the next amount of money. So what you ultimately need to do is before you dive into, and I know there are some things which you can do really, really simply and on the cheap, and that's a great thing to be able to do, particularly if you can code as well. But if you can't code, then you do need to make sure that you're going to get enough money to get to the next stage. And so the amount of money you raise is always going to be, will this get me to this next, whether it's to a proof of concept or to show that we can scale the business. And investors, a very early investor in LookSmart actually taught us this lesson. And he said, I'm not going to invest $1 million in you guys because I think it's going to take $5 million, and so you're going to come back. And so for that reason, we were only asking for $1 million, but he thought it was going to be $5 million, so he wasn't prepared to put the $1 million up. So, yeah.
I think one really fascinating thing to me in your journey is traditionally marketplaces, people will give you the advice that this supply side, both sides are hard, but the supply side, don't worry too much about it and just focus on this demand, the buyers in the marketplace. And I think obviously core to your vision in the first sentence of what you stand for is for artists. Explain sort of how you arrived at that, and then also these moments of tension, like what were the moments of tension where it was for artists and not for buyers?
So when we made that decision to build something for ourselves, what we recognised was that I've said that nobody wakes up in the morning thinking, oh, unless I buy a T-shirt today, I'm going to be, my life's going to be incomplete. It's people don't have that passion. But the artists, by contrast, they actually do have the passion to overcome difficulties. And so they, in the early days, for them, they had the fire and hair problem of just wanting to be out there, and they were tolerant. They were actually incredibly tolerant of not getting sales. So even while we're getting all those, even while we're not actually selling anything, we're still getting that incredible response from the artists and designers, because they were prepared to just be there and just occasionally put up with something. So we recognised where the real problem was in the market, and the problem was a supply side problem much more than it was a demand side. I think that over the years we've actually had to learn, and it's been actually really hard to integrate into the DNA what the nature of the buyer problem is and how we can solve that. And I know it's hard because the board beats me up about it, and so it hurts my head because they hit me on the head so hard about how bad we are from a buyer's perspective. But we do. The challenge then is it's actually recognising what is the most important thing there. Some things are good for buyers and good for sellers, but there's actually an awful lot of things where there's a conflict, and how you resolve that. You're not always going to resolve it on the side of the artist, but there are some things you actually. So I'll give you an example, an easy one. So back in 2009, it would have been quite easy. We actually had quite a lot of traffic. It would have been quite easy for us to take advertising on the website. We could have done that, and would have really helped with our economics, of course, because advertising's great, but it was actually going to be really bad for the artists. And so that was it said, okay, it's great, but we're just not going to do it from a values-driven perspective. So that's an example. And then you do get things where, well, wouldn't it be great from a buyers if you did that, but it will actually diminish the experience which an artist have. And so we always have a sense of what the true north is there. And I think you do need to have a view about that as well. You can't just say we're going to be equally good for buyers and sellers all of the time, because that's simply not going to be able to optimize on that all of the time. There is actually, sometimes you can, but sometimes you can't.
Question from the audience. So fail faster has become a popular mantra. Do you think you fail fast enough? And then I also, maybe to add to that, how do you know if it has failed? What kind of measurement frameworks have you sort of worked through?
Oh, I don't think we did fail fast enough, to be honest. I think we're things which, actually, let me think through that. Sometimes we did and sometimes we didn't. So there's things which we tried, which we left on the site for too long and we didn't pull the plug on. But there's other things which you think aren't going to work, and they just sort of bubble along, and eventually they do. So I don't know whether it's possible. It would be great to fail fast all the time, in the sense that you were absolutely sure when you pull the plug on something that it was a failure. And I think that would be really good. That would be, that's a sort of a level of confidence, and we've failed. But I think sometimes you just don't know whether things are a failure, and just a lot of stuff ends up in that little world of being a little bit successful, and then you've got to make a decision about what you're going to do with it. And we had some designs. I think at the moment RedBubble's going through another sort of important pivoting point right now as we go through a branding exercise. We're going to have to be careful as we make some of those transitional changes. A/B testing certainly helps you to know whether something's failing or not versus what you have. But sometimes in an A/B test, I'll look at something and say, well, I know it's not getting better, but I actually reckon it's better for the longer term. So you have to be a little bit careful about deciding what a failure truly is, I think.
What do you wish you knew at 24?
I wish I knew at 24. I think the hardest thing. When I was 24, I was going to Egypt to learn Arabic, and then going to Syria as a diplomat. And I was passionate about what I was doing then. I believed in it, and it was very sustaining to me. I don't, every stage of your life journey has its different aspects to it. I don't think you can learn something in 24. What heavens above, I'm 50 now, sort of, 53, truly. But, you can't take a lesson from being 53 and apply it to 24. You're 24, you should be doing what you're doing at 24. Don't listen to me on that subject. No, go and be 24. Take drugs or get tattoos or whatever you're going to do.
You heard it here first.
Yeah.
I'm actually interested in, obviously you were part of another wonderful success. So Evan has spoken today. What did you have to unlearn from the LookSmart experience to be successful at RedBubble?
Well, Evan dealt with it, to be honest. And what the problem with LookSmart wasn't a great idea. It just wasn't a great idea. And we pivoted it, endless number of times because the idea was poor. And I think it was poor on the primary dimension that it hadn't identified a customer need really clearly. It was a good business idea, and that was pretty good, but it wasn't clear who the customer was, and as a result, you're actually then not knowing what you're pivoting around. What are you trying to achieve here? So the thing which I took out of LookSmart was, whenever I do the next thing, whatever it's going to be, I'm going to know who the customer is, and I'm going to identify that, and I'm going to focus on that with a relentlessness. And then for the part of this presentation, when we first did the first slides and said we're not going to be, then I realized, actually, I have to be the customer. In the first instance, if you're not the customer of your product, if you're building it for somebody else, unless you're Procter & Gamble and have got the resources to do all of the market research which is required, you have to ultimately build it for yourself as a first customer. And if you're not prepared to tell your friends about what you're doing because you're ashamed of it or think it's, then you've got a problem. So I think you have to build it from your perspective. And in the case of LookSmart, we just, it was a good business idea, but it just didn't have that core customer, view at the heart of it. Not all things have to be like that. Clearly, you can have just a brilliant piece of technology which you're passionate and engaged in, which can just work. Something like Google. But if it's going to be an outward-facing customer-related thing, then that clarity around the customer need is just fundamentally important. Interestingly enough, it's actually one of the hardest things for VCs to fund in a way, particularly early stages, because if it's not a piece of technology which is clear about its need, and if the customer is actually, then it becomes really an investment in brand, because that's ultimately what you're dealing with. The best definition of brand I've ever heard is it's a promise between a company and its customers, and that's actually much harder for the venture capital community to invest in. So RedBubble actually has successfully failed at raising venture capital money, but we have raised money over the years successfully from people who've got that real brand orientation and that focus around understanding what a brand can be.
A question on a slide you had the fraud control, and this is actually an interesting one for me, because every marketplace business, it's actually, you think it's a negative thing, it's actually a positive thing. It means that you've actually achieved an initial unit of success. Every marketplace will have these fraud horror stories. What was the worst fraud horror story? What was a Russian hacker story?
Oh, yeah.
Relay?
And it comes in waves as well. So I'm not quite sure what the fraud issue was back in 2009, but back in 2010, suddenly I think we must have got sort of put on some whatever the dark net is. I don't actually know what the dark net is. I read about it again. I still don't know what it is.
It's on 60 Minutes, I think.
I wonder whether anybody who's talking about the dark web ever knows what it is. I'll have to ask this audience. Somebody who's 24 probably knows. Anyway, we must have been discovered on the dark web, even though I don't know what it is, because some Russians we just got descended upon, absolutely descended upon by these people who discovered a way of what they were doing was they were selling stuff to each other, and they were collecting the artist margin. So it was a way of them actually getting cash out of it. We do get all these people who buy stuff on fake credit cards, and you can solve that one over time. But this one was actually quite tricky, and we had to get this was when we first employed a fraud officer. So the thing was, it really did come in this huge wave, and suddenly fraud went from a historical, now it's absolutely negligible, like on a well under 0.1%, in fact well under 0.01% of sales of fraud. It's just absolutely negligible. But back then, it suddenly was 10, 15, and 20% of things were being fraudulent, and that, like, it's just like, and you think to yourself, what have I done wrong in my life? You know, you think it's, I think it's something karma or something, because you go out there in the world doing good. I'm helping artists. I'm a nice person. I don't beat the dog, and then suddenly all these people come in and being mean to you. It's really nasty.
Question around the founding team, and I think interestingly, the founding team of RedBubble was perhaps non-traditional to a 2014 kind of founding team. I think there were mainly non-technical founders. What's the right size, and what was the sort of glue that brought you together?
The founding team, we knew each other, which I think was really key. And while we were non-technical, my co-founders were Peter Stiles and Paul Van Zeller. Paul is a designer, and so as I said about that business plan, I do think the number one reason people invested in the site was they said, gee, if you can do this sort of design, you know, it's going to be great. And the fact we couldn't build it was almost sort of like after the event, they sort of thought, you at least understand something. And so I think that was actually really important. And then Paul did do, he was actually in that slide about We Stand for Artists, that was actually a picture of Paul. So he did actually do all of the designs for quite a while, and he would review designs with people, with designers. I'm not sure that the designers loved this very much, but he would review design for quite a long time, and it had a really important impact. And he was actually also our credibility, because he's not only a designer, but he's also an artist and a designer artist, and so he was interacting very intensely with the community as well. So he had a lot of credibility. And Peter, by contrast, he is ex-military, and he was able to, you know, get in those early days and just put in the long hours and the long days to make it happen when I was sort of swanning about. So he was really able to focus in on just making sure things happen and getting the trains, because it was quite a complicated site. You know, it is a lot. Trust me, it is a lot harder to ship real things than dots and zeros. So and shipping stuff, like our first Christmas. Just to give you a sense of this, our first Christmas, we had one supplier in America, and they stopped, and they went on holiday to Hawaii. So one of our personnel had to go to Hawaii to actually start the machine and make the t-shirts themselves. So the first Christmas, we couldn't ship anything. The second Christmas, we started production in Germany, and that was when we had negative margins. We actually had negative margins. So we didn't want to ship anything in the second Christmas because we were losing stuff on everything we saw. And the third Christmas, we actually could ship stuff, and we actually changed production, so we had positive margins. But in the third Christmas, two things happened. One, this is now during the GFC, and America was stopping things coming into this. They were actually holding things up at the border. It was a tariff war, which wasn't really a tariff war. It was really an odd thing. They just was stopping things coming into America. And we also lost a truck of T-shirts, and this was because we had to buttress one of our suppliers by sending a truck, and this was the huge snowstorms, and so we lost 30,000 T-shirts, and this really did almost go. And again, we actually had to send somebody to America to find a truck of T-shirts to get them to the supplier, so we really did. And Peter was just great at making that stuff happen. Yeah.
Cool. We might do one more question. I think it was around how do you come up with product ideas as a company, and maybe describe in the early days of you being the customer, but how the company comes up with ideas.
It depends whether they're physical product ideas or website features. So physical product ideas now you can actually print on a lot of stuff. We could do mouse pads, we could do shower curtains, we could do whatever we like, and that is getting ever broader. And again, the way we choose that is we actually have clarity around who our customers are. So while the technology can do anything, it's actually a decision about what you actually choose to do, and that's actually a decision which is really made. You can only make that on the basis of brand, where you want to be and where you want to play, and so that's how we come up with the physical product ideas. You know, we get a bit mad, and we push our suppliers, and we get fundamentally new concepts. There's a whole bunch of new things which are getting ready to launch, which nobody else has done on the internet or ever made before, in a way. So that's really exciting for us. Website features, I think Collis had got it completely right. It's a mixture between maths and heart and head. You got to have a little bit of analytics and a little bit of this, but then you got to have a view about will you use the feature? What does it look like over the time? And you have to have a little bit of it, and that actually gets a bit hard, to be honest. And again, because sometimes you do get that a bit wrong at times, and you have too many features. You got to scale it back, you know, or how to actually make it work in a way which is sensible for the users. And it's funny enough, you know, users, they really, they don't want a lot of features which they don't use, and so getting the right balance there is actually quite important.
Cool. Ladies and gentlemen, thank Martin Hosking.
Am I allowed to plug T-shirts?
No. Yeah, no, you, one of the questions was, I didn't ask it, but can people get a discount? Or well, tell people what they can buy.
I should have come with a discount. I didn't. You have to...
Discount on the pug-related products?
Yeah, I could. I could generate a discount code. Yes, there is a discount. I will generate a discount code right after here, so you'll be able to get 10% off on the code Sunrise 2014. So I'll generate a code, and that will be available in about half an hour. Sunrise 2014.
Thank you, Martin.
Okay.